Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Watchung Booksellers podcast. If you are new to our podcast, thanks for listening in. Each week on the Watchung Booksellers podcast, we bring in 2 or 3 of our store's community of book professionals, writers, publishing folks, booksellers, to talk about a different aspect of the book world. They share a conversation that we might get to hear at Watchung Booksellers, and now we get to share it with you. I'm Catherine, and I'm here with my co-producer, Marnie.
Hi.
Hey, Marnie.
Hello.
What are you reading these days?
I have Asia's copy of Pew by Catherine Lacey. It came out in 2020. It's contemporary fiction. It's Asia's from the store. It's her favorite book. And it's really good. I'm halfway through. I'm loving it. How about you?
Yeah, I think Nicole liked that one too.
Yeah.
I just got back from vacation. I got to go to Paris, and while I was there, I went to Shakespeare and Company, which is phenomenal. And the book I picked up was a bookseller recommendation called The Paris Trilogy by Callum Schneck. And it's a slim memoir in 3 parts about a woman in various stages of her life. She talks about having an abortion when she was 17, and then she talks about this lifelong friendship. And then finally, she talks about discovering swimming in her 50s. So it's super cool. It's so good. I'm not sure if it's available in the States, but we'll put it on the website if it is. And speaking of vacation, while our staff has been on vacation, me included, we decided to air some of our recorded events that we've had in the store. And today we're throwing it back to 2023 when we had the pleasure of hosting Dionne Ford for the launch of her memoir, Go Back and Get It. We had Dionne on the show in episode 2 with Alice Elliott Dark to talk about writing and self-care. And after you hear this episode, you'll get a better understanding of why self-care is so important. Anyway, her book it's a very deep and powerful story, and it was just wonderful to have that launch in our flagship store with Cleyvis Natera.
Yeah, and actually we had read her memoir, Go Back and Get It. And Dionne came to our memoir book club in the store, and she was kind enough to speak with all of the memoir book club members, and that was really fantastic.
Dionne Ford is the author of Go Back and Get It, a memoir of race, inheritance, and intergenerational healing. She is also an NEA Creative Writing Fellow and the co-editor of the anthology Slavery's Descendants, Shared Legacies of Race and Reconciliation. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Literary Hub, New Jersey Monthly, The Rumpus, and Ebony, and won awards from the National Association of Black Journalists and the Newswomen's Club of New York. She holds a BA from Fordham University and an MFA from New York University. Next year, Dionne is hosting a memoir writing retreat in the French Pyrenees. You can find out more about that and contact her via her website at dionneford.com.
And Cleyvis Natera is the author of Neruda on the Park, a New York Times Editor's Choice in 2022. She was born in the Dominican Republic, migrated to the United States at 10 years old, and grew up in New York City. She holds a BA from Skidmore College and an MFA from New York University. Her writing has won awards and fellowships from PEN America, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Kenyon Review's Writers Workshop, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She lives with her husband and 2 young children in Montclair, New Jersey.
Enjoy the conversation, and we'll be back afterwards to fill you in on what's coming up in the store.
Well, thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with me.
Well, don't thank me yet. Let's see how this goes. First, I want to just apologize to everyone in the front if I flash you, because it's like the first warm day. And I have to let my legs out. I was like, I hope everybody's okay right here. So apologies in advance to the front row. I am so thrilled to be here with Dionne. You know, I had the opportunity to read this remarkable memoir a few months ago, and I just haven't been able to stop thinking about it. It is brilliant, it is beautiful and moving, and I'm so excited to get into it. So the way we're gonna do this is that I'm gonna warm you all up with a little question for Dionne, then she's gonna read a little bit, and then I'll come back and ask some questions, and then you get to ask some questions. So just as I'm getting you started, just start thinking about your questions. How does that sound? Good. Okay, don't move too much, because it's really hot. So we all have to be like bubbles here. So, I mean, the first question, I'm really curious just to hear a little bit about your journey. I know that you started out as a fiction writer, and then you ended up deciding to write this memoir. So I'm really curious if you would spend a few minutes telling all of us about your journey as a writer.
Sure, yes. You know, we have so much in common. We both went to NYU for fiction, but long before that, I started out as a journalist. And so I guess I was kind of always working on this in a way. I feel like it was probably my first journalistic endeavor, frankly. From the time my grandpa told me about his grandparents, I was interested in them and would from time to time try and find information about them on my own. By the time I decided that I wanted to, go and get my MFA, and I had a novel that I was working on, I was really excited to get into that prestigious place and be able to work with such smart and talented professors and, other writers. My cohort was so smart. But, and by that point I had been working on my memoir separately and alone and felt like I had, gotten to a good place with it and I would just circle back to it, at some point. But once I got to school, weirdly, after one semester, like it just was on my mind and I kind of couldn't stop thinking about it and sort of always working on it. So I asked the director of the program, even though I was there for fiction and they had no nonfiction track at that time, if it would be okay if I worked on it on my memoir as my final project. And she was fine with it as long as my thesis advisor was fine with it. And that was in 2015, 2016. So it's been a long journey. But I will say that after I started working on it there, I kind of quickly found an agent. So that was also sort of just another kind of outside validation that this project that had been mostly mine might find a place in the world as well.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I mean, anytime that we follow that urgency, both in our imaginations, I think, and also just in our lives, like the story that can't wait to get out is the one that takes center stage so often. And if we listen, I think the result can be just astounding. Yeah. So why don't you read to us for a little bit?
Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to read from my prologue since it sets up the book, and hopefully it will give you some idea of the course that the book takes. And my prologue is called A Relation. If you are going to look for your enslaved ancestors, you will have to look for the people who enslaved them. Any African American can expect that 19% of their ancestors were white men. So the enslavers might also be your relatives. This is a study in contrasts. Shadow, light, black, white, joy, pain, victim, perpetrator. You will find ephemera, editorials, photographs, wedding announcements, and atrocities. Lynched uncles, your people as property in someone's will, deed, or mortgage guarantee. You will also find the living, third cousins, once removed, fifth cousins, straight up, and descendants of the family that forced your family into slavery. You will meet them on beaches, in dusty archives, in farmhouses, scratching at the past like it is a lotto game, and you are strokes away from a million more reasons to believe. For a time, you will cease to believe in or pray to God, and instead will pray to your ancestors, the enslaved ones, the women, because they are what you want to be: mother, creator, feminine, divine. They were raped, they were sold away, they kept on living, some even thrived. If you are going to look for your enslaved ancestors, you will have to reconsider the word lucky. In 1858, when Colonel W.R. Stewart, a wealthy Louisiana cotton broker, married Elizabeth Macaulay, a girl from a long line of North Carolina plantation owners, her family gave the couple a slave named Tempe Burton as a wedding gift. Elizabeth was sickly and couldn't have children, but Tempe could and did have 6 of them with her new master, the Colonel. My great-grandmother Josephine, born a decade after slavery ended, was their youngest child. On my 38th birthday, I found their picture on the internet. It was May 7, 2007, and with those 7s, I'd like to tell you that I was feeling lucky. Tempe was in the middle of the photo. Her former masters, Elizabeth and the Colonel, were sitting behind her. On either side of Tempe were 2 biracial-looking girls. The one on the left was curly-haired and creamy-skinned like my dad and my daughters. It was eerie how the century-old photo of my ancestors mirrored the new family I'd created. Lucky and unlucky number 7. In 7 days, God made the world. In 7 plagues, God could wipe it out. On the 7th of May, I was born. In my 7th year, I was raped. It's been said that it takes 7 years for every cell in your body to change. In the 7 years after finding the family photo, I crisscrossed the country, uncovering the stories of the people in it, and a breach began to mend in me. There is a name for this kind of pilgrimage. The Akan of Western Africa call it Sankofa, symbolized by a bird in flight with its head craned backward and an egg in its beak. Sankofa means to go back and get it, or it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. Thank you.
Such a great beginning. And it really does set up like the entire book, I think, in such a beautiful way. So first, I mean, how are you doing? I feel like I just published my book last May, and I felt like the whole thing was so surreal at the beginning. Like it's like time ceases to like matter, and everything's happening. You're so excited. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I am all of those things, all over the place. And I think you just need to look at my house to see that it is a manifestation of my emotional state, a complete discombobulation.
But joyful too, because guess what? Like, you published the book. I just want everybody to clap again. I've been like doing the tap dance, like, here comes Dionne. It's just really remarkable. So the first question I wanted to ask you, it's about the structure. I mean, we're both writers and we're both obsessed with like the shape of things. And you know what I think is really interesting about this book, the shape of it, is that it's like a braided structure. So like one braid is your life and what happens as you're dealing with this trauma of having been raped as a child. And then there's another braid, which is like this obsession with finding your ancestors and dealing with that violence. And in a way, it's like the story of this country, right? Of like the history of the United States. And so the first thing that I wanted you to talk about is what made you choose this structure for this book?
Thank you for asking that question. I'll try to answer. I don't know how much I chose it as it chose me. So I think initially what I really wanted to do is structure the whole book around anything that I found about my ancestors. And so I think that initial impetus remains to some degree. But then, as you said, I needed to also find a way to braid in my own story. So I think what I tried to do was use whatever I discovered as the spine of the story to kind of like propel, us from chapter to chapter. And then find a way to then tell my life now, or whatever pertinent thing, had happened in my life based on the discovery of, something about my ancestors. So yeah, I wanted those discoveries about them to be the propulsion, what's moving us forward.
Yeah, and it's really propulsive. I mean, it's so interesting because when I got it in a paperback, an advanced copy of it, so it feels lighter. And each time I came back to it, because I read it like in a white heat, I was like, oh, this is so good, And even the hard parts, I was like, oh my God, like this is so enlightening. And the way you've done it, I think is really honest, like in a really important way. But each time I came to the book, I just was like astounded that it's so light. Like I was like, this book feels like so big, like the depth of it is so big. And so I think that's really difficult to pull off, to be able to tell a story that is telling the truth, that it's like found objects and known objects, and then also that it's weaving together like your own personal life. And I loved it. I mean, you guys this is just gonna be a fangirl event. I love your book.
Fine.
I really do think that being courageous as a writer is probably the hardest thing to do, because so often we're like seduced by the idea of like presenting the world in a very sanitized way. And I thought that the way that you address the violence that has happened in this country, like what this country has been built on, is the violence against Black women. And for some reason, it seems like we just still don't acknowledge that. And so I just wanted to know, like, why do you think it's important to confront issues of like sexual violence as fundamental to the creation of the United States? And I also want to know, why do you think there is so much resistance in acknowledging the mass rape of Black women in this country?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, why it was, did you say why was it important to me, or why is it important just like generally?
I think it's the same question.
Okay. So to me, it seemed important because to me it seemed obvious, but in my experience, it just seems that for some reason that piece of it gets lost in our discussions when we have discussions about slavery and how it is foundational to our economic prowess. You know, we became a superpower in a very short amount of time, and it's because of, you know, we enslaved people. So there is that. And then if we talk about, but like, what else did we do? You know, we made laws around Black women's bodies, you know, and that their children would be slaves as well. And then so I just feel like we don't talk about that because you know, we don't talk about sex, you know, and we don't talk about violence and sex. Even if you think about like when we bring awareness to sexual violence, I'm always shocked at how often, whenever there is like any media around it, it's often about men, you know, like who were abused in childhood, or it's about adult women in the workplace, which are issues, but those are not the people who are most victimized. Right. The people who are most victimized actually are Indigenous women, and then it's Black women. So I think there's something to that is the truth, and that's what we most often don't talk about. And to me, you know, if you can't face it, you can't fix it. So I feel like it's actually very empowering to say that this is what the truth is, because then you have something that you can do about it. I mean, I think that's why I wanted to be a journalist. I found it really empowering to know things, you know, and I felt like that gave me some agency then to like figure out what I could do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I also feel like one of the things that's so striking about the memoir is that there is like a very visceral way in which we understand like the cost to the human being, to like the person, when we are, and by we I mean you, like as you are both trying to numb away that trauma from childhood, and as you're growing up and you're time and time again, you're like forced to confront it. And I was thinking, as I was reading the book and as I was rereading the book, I was thinking a lot about how so much of what happens in this country, like these bursts of violence and these bursts of rage that I think happens, are like that sore, right? Like that kind of rottenness that is in the marrow of like who we are as a country. And how like the more and the more that we try to like hide it and numb it and look away from it, the like bigger it becomes. And so in your own life, I thought that journey, you know, we're talking a lot about like no spoilers. and Dionne said, what can we spoil? I mean, it's like my life, which I love that you're like so open about it. And I was just thinking a lot, like I kept thinking about this idea that the way that you talk about your own personal life, to me, like just really becomes symbolic of so many of the things that happen in this country. And it's really, it's so remarkable. I mean, it's so powerful. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about joy.
Yay.
And because, you know, I think that there's so much beauty and love in this book. And there is this idea of that I think sometimes when we pick up a book that has like difficult themes, as human beings, it's like, I think we have a habit to like buy the book so that it's in our bookshelf, right? Like, oh, it's like... No. And you know, and I think a lot about 2020 when like for the first time in the United States, like nearly every book in the New York Times bestseller book was dealing with race. Because we were having a reckoning, but then like a couple of months later, guess what happened? And then when I talk to people about those books, right, because some of us read those books all the time, like most people haven't read the books. And I'm very proud of those of you. I'm sure none of those people are you. Everybody here has read all the books. But you know, that's something that to me, I was thinking a lot about, Dionne, about like just just as you're confronting it, as you're working through all of this. Yeah, I think that there's a way in which like your bravery and your courage to me made something really beautiful. And I can only imagine how difficult it was to write this book and to go on the journey of finding your ancestors. But I wanted you to share with us what was joyful, because I actually found the book to be filled with so much beauty.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad, because that's what I wanted. And I don't think I could have stayed with something that wasn't uplifting for me, you know. I just feel like my ancestors were really incredible, you know. I mean, you know, regular people, but they really survived so much. And I'm thinking particularly about my great-great-grandmother, Tempe, lived to be like 104 years old, which is insane. You know, this is a woman who spent half of her life enslaved and then the rest of her life free. And she owned property, which I thought was fantastic. I love that when it came time, you know, she made a decision to make sure that her daughters would be property owners. So she gave them some of her property, which I just thought, yay! You know, we often hear like the firstborn or the son, you know, at that time, that would have been sort of a typical thing. So I thought, like, good looking out, Grandma, you know, yes, like, take care of your daughters. Also, I grew up in the AME tradition. My dad's an AME minister, he's here, but did not start off AME. My dad and my mom chose to become AME. My dad started off as a Methodist, and that was the tradition that Tempe also practiced. I guess in my mind, I often would think about Black people who had been enslaved sort of having the religion of their enslavers forced upon them. So it was actually really very powerful to learn about more of the history of Methodism in this country, and that among the first Methodists in this country were enslaved Black women. That was shocking to me. And so while I don't know exactly how Tempe, my great-great-grandmother, came to Methodism, I did find it really like illuminating and kind of like a beacon that women before her, enslaved people before her, did have some agency in how they, you know, in this most sacred space in their lives, how they prayed. I found that really, really beautiful, and kind of gave me actually a new appreciation for the religion that, you know, brought me up. There are so many things. Even, I will say, even about like my great-great-grandfather, my enslaving ancestor, you know, there are things about him that like I was proud to learn, if that's the right phrase. So after slavery was over, and he was really interested in cultivation and did cultivate a strand of a pecan if you're from the South, that you can still buy today. And so while I don't know all of the ins and outs of that, there's something about that just, you know, it stayed with me. You know, we make pecan pies every Thanksgiving, and there was something about that I took a little bit of pride in. So twisted history to it, but something that was nice to know. So yeah, the discoveries for me were, every time I learned anything, honestly, about my great-great-grandmother in particular, it was just kind of like, served as like a talisman for me.
Yeah, it's so powerful to learn like the extent to which you went. I won't tell you, you gotta read it. But it's really fascinating, like how you went about connecting the dots and finding information that for others it would have just been like the first dead end, would have been like, never mind, like there's no way to find our people. And I think that among the things I appreciate most about this book, I think is, first of all, like the resilience and the strength that you are learning about through your ancestors, especially Tempe. I think it's very clear that like you inherited that, and it was beautiful for me as a reader to be like, badass, yes, check. and then I think also just like this idea that like we are called upon as artists, I think so often to like light the way for other people, and to be like, we are not people-less people. And like just because we don't have the archives and we can't find the names of those from whom we are descended, it doesn't mean that we don't come from remarkable, beautiful, powerful people. And so it was just like really important, I think, that you continued, and like your obsession, which at one point I was like, where are you going? I think this is not safe. This is me talking to the book. And I honestly was like, yes, you are like on this journey, which is like a spiritual journey. And like this is now like the archive. This is the proof. This is like what gives the rest of us this like lovely totem, right? To be like this, even if I don't know who my great-great-grandmother is, it could have been Tempe, you know, or someone like Tempe. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's so beautifully put, because that's what I wanted. Sometimes people ask me, so why did you choose to write a memoir as opposed to a novel? You could have made this into a novel. It's because I needed the record.
Yeah.
And I needed to leave something, you know, for my girls and to give it to my family. And so, yeah, I couldn't have said that better.
You'd think I was a writer. So now we're gonna open it up for your questions. So I know at the beginning people get a little shy. So who's gonna be the brave? Talking about courage. Oh, please.
Hey, I was wondering, I know you probably used your skills as a journalist doing the research, but did you also reach out to professional genealogists, or how did you approach it just as a research task?
So the question is around genealogy and whether or not Dionne, aside from her using her own skills as a journalist, whether or not you also reached out to like some professional genealogists.
Yeah, I did eventually reach out to some professional genealogists in Louisiana and Mississippi, because I just didn't have the ducats to go and take the time and do what I would have needed to do. Also, because they already had the relationships down there, you know, and that is something that comes up in the book, that relationships matter. You know, people have the key to certain archives, and it was better for me, for people who were known and who could say to so-and-so, hey, I just need, you know, this document, than for unknown me with this face to go certain places. So I kind of sadly learned that the hard way. Had I really thought about the implications of showing up at certain archives, I probably would have just tried to save my money and do a lot of that, farm that out, hire that out. So yeah, I absolutely did use some really fantastic genealogists to help me with this research when I couldn't do it myself. Thank you, Kate, for that question.
Thank you. So I have to think about redemption and reparation. On a personal level, do you feel redeemed, that there's been redemption, that there's been a repair, that there's been some, it certainly seems that way, you know, from this process. And also, moving forward, reparations for what's happened. How can I, as a person who wants to see reparation, what can I do to make that happen to people that have been hurt tremendously?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think when it comes to reparations for slavery, you know, New Jersey, we are trying to get some bills through. So you can certainly contact your senators and tell them that you support those bills. These are just bills that would study reparations. They're not even, you know, saying what they are. So any support you could do at the state level, that would be great. And I think for me, I don't think I was looking for redemption, but for personal repair and reconcile to my family, my story, my country. I absolutely do, yeah, because I feel like I really have a much better understanding about the trajectory of our country, and I have a much better understanding about my people's place in that, and I think I also know that they did have a place, and so does everybody. And so I really appreciate being able to just kind of dig in to see what that was and experience it. So yeah, I feel reconciled, absolutely. And yeah, I hope that other folks will definitely support reparations for people who were, you know, descendants of people who were enslaved. I think they're probably the only group that hasn't received some form of reparations for their unpaid labor here.
Have you been able to address the generational emotional trauma of your ancestors?
What do you mean by that?
I mean that the trauma of the the violence that's been passed down through the generations. I mean, it's in our DNA.
Yeah. I think for me, I do that by trying to connect to my ancestors. There's all that I can do for myself personally, all that I can do within my family, but every day I keep an altar, and my ancestors' picture is on it, all of them, including the ones who I'm not very fond of, which I've learned from some of my spiritual leaders that that's the way to do it, and so I keep my ancestors really close. And I think for me that has been really comforting and healing for me. I'm sure folks have to find, their own way to move through that. But most importantly, I think being honest and forthright about the harms that have happened, as you said, generationally, is for me the biggest step that I've taken.
Hey, Dionne.
Hi, Greer.
So happy to be here. Similar question, but a little different. It's about forgiveness. And I hope I'm not going to do a spoiler. You told me a story about meeting with your white cousins, the Descendants, and about kind of the inequality of assets and wealth that had been accumulated generationally. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process of forgiveness and reconciliation with, you keep referencing your ancestors, and yet you have this dual reality of your ancestors are both black and white, and your black ancestors suffered so many harms and continued. The legacy is still there. So what is your process of forgiveness been?
I guess just getting honest with what happened, getting clear about that, my feelings about that, and actually allowing myself to be angry was really important. I feel like I was socialized, and maybe many women will, relate to this, but socialized to not be angry and to move on to forgiveness. And so I think in this instance where, my people hadn't done anything wrong and something really unjust had been done to them, it was appropriate for me to feel a lot of anger. I actually went to my minister after meeting, with those family members because I was so angry and so uncomfortable with my anger. And it was actually very healing for me to hear my minister not say anything like, what can we do to help you move on? That was, no words like that came from him. And that was really helpful to me, to be able to honor this sort of ancestral rage, and that was really medicinal for me, actually, now that I think about it. And so as far as forgiveness, I think it was Mary Bethune McClone, I just messed up her name, Mary McLeod Bethune, thank you, Bethune, who said, forgiveness is not forgetting, it's letting go of your pain. And so for me, that has been the forgiveness. I completely acknowledge and remember what happened, but I'm letting go of the pain of it. It's not mine. That's been very helpful to me. Yeah, I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
I'm not the only person here who followed your blog, Finding Josephine, way back in the day.
Yeah.
And I think you did a presentation, I think your dad was there too that day, about the things you had found at the beginning of your journey. And I at that point, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be a book. When's she going to do a memoir about this? But it sounds like it had more stages. Like you didn't go from blog to book. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how you pivoted from being this blogger to kind of a novelist, because I know that was what you were intending to do when you got your MFA. Like, how did it become a thing you are sharing with all of us at this point? If that question.
Lord, that's a book within itself. Yeah, I mean, the blog really was about, so one of the joys, I forgot this, was meeting my third cousin once removed, Monique, who, became my research partner, who I met through Ancestry after I found that picture. It was such a joy to find somebody who was as obsessed with our family's history as I was, and who could, really like get in there and appreciate and dig with me, and who had 2 daughters also around the same age as mine. So we really bonded, and that was wonderful, like just being able to go on that journey with her. And really the blog was because we were trying to figure out what we could do to try and find more information, more of our people. So she took a bunch of things on the list of to-dos, and I took a bunch of things on the list of to-dos. And since I was a journalist, I was like, okay, I'll do the blog, where, it was that or like send every person with the last name Burton, Stewart, Ford, a postcard. And that didn't seem like that was gonna be a very efficient way to contact people. So, I started the blog, Finding Josephine, because that's who I was looking for, my great-grandmother on my father's side. And yeah, as we continue to find things, kind of just being honest with myself that I did really want to write a book about it, and just sort of, writing that all along as we were researching is what I did. Also getting back to the joy and real ambition I had to write a novel, and applying to NYU, getting in and going, okay, I'm gonna do this, and then I'll just get back to the memoir. And then just, I guess, honesty, like raising its head again, that really this was the thing that had been lighting a fire under me for years. And so that I just was gonna pivot and really go full force toward this. So I hope that is an answer to your question. Thank you.
How many relatives did you meet, and how many places did you travel to?
Wow, okay, so I met at least 10 relatives, and I traveled to Maryland, Mississippi, Louisiana, Virginia, Brazil. And the Brazil thing is a little side story, but it was an important part of my journey only because the story, Brazil's story around slavery has parallels, and it's huge. And I lived in Brazil when I was a teenager, and it was in Brazil that I actually kind of got a real perspective on our country for the first time that I had never really had before, just because of their ideas around race and slavery. I lived in a town that had been founded by U.S. Confederates, like of all the places in Brazil to end up, I ended up at this place. And that made me realize just how little I knew about our own country's history with slavery, and yeah, it was shocking. So I ended up going back to Brazil to visit that town with my family now. So yeah, I clocked some miles and met a lot of wonderful family, and happy to still be in contact with some of them, which has been really nice.
Do you have any suggestions for people who are trying to follow your journey up and finding people in their family? What approach would you, from your own experience, give to us? I mean, I know there's genealogy and anthropology and all that, but you personally, those things we know about, but is there anything that you would give us that we might not know?
Boy, that you might not know, that's hard to say, but I would say that, the very first thing that, I wouldn't have a book had I not talked to my grandfather when I was 12, So I think the first thing is to talk to your elders and get their stories and be inquisitive and listen to them as much as possible. Thank God for that lazy summer day that we had, just the two of us, where he could kind of stretch out with his memories, because he had my full attention. So I feel like that's the very, very, very first thing, is to get with the people and get their stories. And then after that, it's probably gonna be you don't have to stomp the pavement anymore, actually. You can go online to repositories like Ancestry.com or like the family one. Family Search, that's it, Family Search. It was free the last time I looked at it. I think it's still free. So trying to just get as many documents also about your family. There, death certificates, etc., census reports are really helpful. So, but first and foremost, oral tradition stories.
Thanks, congratulations, Dionne, and thank you for a wonderful discussion. So I've known you through this process, and I've seen you grow into a pretty expert historian compared to someone like me. And I was struck in your book by the journalism and the history finding, and I was wondering how you felt about the fact that opportunities now are coming to you to use that expertise and to use that historical knowledge, and sort of has put you in this position now of being somebody who has all this institutional knowledge, and sort of how you feel about representing that post-publication. And tag question, do you think you'll do more journalism? Do you think you'll go back into any kind of journalism? Because I really saw the gift you have there.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
That's 10 questions.
Journalists will tell you it's hard, man, and people get mad when you ask them stuff, and that was the part that was most difficult for me, like how just angry. I have a low tolerance for not niceness towards me. So, I don't know. That remains to be seen. I mean, I think if anything, I would love for maybe this to shine a light on is just how difficult it is to do this work, and how we should really provide more support for people, particularly when their ancestors are enslaved. You shouldn't really have to go banging on the door of descendants of people who enslaved your people asking for records. So if there's some way to make those public and more accessible, that would be a wonderful way to begin some reparation. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I'm going to go where my gut tells me to go next. But I do hope, if I'm representing anything, is that this is really, really difficult stuff that should be more accessible to us, so that we can just, honor our people and have them close to us. It should be easier. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dionne and Cleyvis, for being a part of this event. Listeners, you can find their books in our show notes and at watchungbooksellers.com.
And we're excited for a fall season full of events. Here are a few of them that are coming up. On Thursday, September 5th, Jenny Rosenstrack, author of The Weekday Vegetarians, is releasing her follow-up cookbook, The Weekday Vegetarians Get Simple. And on Tuesday, September 10th, we welcome back Ian Frazier for the launch of his newest book of essays, Paradise Bronx. He'll be in conversation with his New Yorker colleague, D.T. Max.
And on September 12th, the Montclair Public Library has a discussion with Matthew Desmond, author of Poverty by America. And on Saturday, September 14th, we're excited to welcome best-selling novelist Laura Dave for the release of her new novel, The Night We Lost Him. Laura is the author of the New York Times #1 best-selling The Last Thing He Told Me. And as a bonus, this book will be available to ticket holders before the release date.
We have so many great talks coming up, too many to mention here. So be sure to sign up for our newsletter or check out the details in our show notes or at watchungbooksellers.com.
The Watchung Booksellers podcast is produced by Catherine Council and Marnie Jessup and is recorded at Silverstream Studio in Montclair, New Jersey. The show is edited by Catherine Council and Brie Testa. Special thanks to Timmy Kaleni and Derek Mathias. Original music is composed and performed by Violet Mujica. Art and design and social media by Evelyn Moulton. Research and show notes by Caroline Shurtleff. Thank you to the staff at Watchung Booksellers and the Kids Room for all their hard work and love of books.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show, please like, follow, and share it. You can follow us on social media at Watchung Booksellers. And if you have any questions or ideas, you can reach us at wbpodcast@watchungbooksellers.com.
We'll see you next time. Until then, for the love of books, keep reading.